What happens when people believe that myths are actually real, factual, historical events? You get a recipe for disaster. You get a recipe for fundamentalism, where people are willing to go to extreme lengths in order to prove that their scriptures, which are really myths, written and maybe blended with some history, are actual historical events. They're actually history and need to be treated as such. You actually get a religion void of any real meaning, truth, or depth to work on the human psyche as myths are meant to do. Last week, we explored what myths are, their emotional, psychological, and story components that act on the psyche in order to help us understand our place in the world. And we also looked at how they can feel like they're true even if they're not. How they can feel like historical events, but that they are there to convey a truth, a psychological, emotional, religious, spiritual, maybe political or moral or value truth, but not necessarily a historical event. Today, we are going to look at the difference between mythos and logos, and of course, define those, and then look and see how we got from mythos to logos that sets the stage for the disease of fundamentalism that we are seeing plague our society today. Welcome. If you're new to my channel, thank you so much. We've had a lot of new subscribers. If you're not a subscriber yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button, the bell, and all of the notifications so that you can make sure you get these as they are coming out and if we ever go live. Also, if you know somebody that might benefit from this, please share this work with them. It is so unique, it's so different, and it is really forward thinking, the work that we're doing here on the channel to deconstruct the ideology behind patriarchy, which means really taking a deeper look at what is history, how it is made, who is telling it, the blend of history and myth together, and the purpose of how they are both different and they act different on our psyches. This is another quick reminder, if you are new, we do have a Foundations of Deconstructing Patriarchy Season 1. It is in a playlist, so you can go back and watch the first 6 episodes. They are in order. All of these videos build on each other, so it's important that you're going to get the concepts, especially for this episode, from the previous episodes that we've already done. It's a binge-worthy library just for you. Our quick outline today, of course, we're going to start with a definition of what fundamentalism is and the major disease that patriarchy perpetuates on all of us that allows fundamentalism to grow at unprecedented rates right now. Number 2, we're going to define what logos and mythos are, of course, always definitions, and then how did we move from a mythos-based culture into a logos-based culture and what that did to the human psyche and continues to do to the human psyche. And then number 3, because I can't leave you without some hope, I'm going to give you the antidote that I'm actually personally working on for us and hope that you will also take a stab at this with me. Without further ado, let's dive in. One of my favorite things to define something so we know exactly what we're dealing with. Wiki has this to say about fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is a tendency among certain groups and individuals that are characterized by the application of a strict literal interpretation to scriptures, dogmas, or ideologies, along with the strong belief in the importance of distinguishing one's in-group and out-group, which leads to an emphasis of some conception of purity and a desire to return to a previous ideal from which advocates believe members have strayed. The term is usually used in the context of religion to indicate an unwavering attachment to a set of irreducible beliefs, the fundamentals. In season 2, we're actually going to dive into the cognitive biases that allow fundamentalism to fester in our brain like a bad disease, and that actually allows a lot of us to go straight from maybe a religious setting with the church into MLMs and other types of cults. So get ready for season 2. For now, though, let's dive a little bit more into what fundamentalism is so we really, again, have that working definition together. My idea of fundamentalism, it is about really ingraining the basics of how people want you to view these mythos as logos, which we'll discuss in a minute how that happens, in order to be able to refute anything that comes towards you or at you that is a different interpretation of those scriptures, of that dogma or the important documents of any type of a group and be able to say, this is not us. This is not the true way. This is not the true meaning of these scriptures. They drill you, for example, in the evangelical world, in what they believe the Bible is teaching in their very narrow, specific viewpoint. And if you have any other interpretations of that, then you are not part of their in-group. You are part of the out-group, which is also cult language. That is what they do in order to establish any type of cult, is there is always an us versus them. Fundamentalism is a way of seeing the world as unchanging, that it was always the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. There's actually a saying, and I don't know if it's part of the Bible, can't remember, I'm losing all my Bible facts. They always wanted to talk about how God was the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, because we live in a world of chaos and the human psyche doesn't know what to do with that unless we have mythos. We try to give our psyche some ability to hold on to the stability of the sameness, and that is through maybe a God or some type of a moral or value that's never going to change. So we feel like we have an anchor point, and that's one of the appeals of fundamentalism, is to give you an anchor point in this world of chaos that's always changing. I don't really know if this fits into this section per se, but I feel like it's so important to name. As I've been undoing my own inner patriarchy, I started to see that whether it was the church or being on the dance floor in a spiritual setting that had nothing to do with the church, there's this feeling within our society, because it's built into our cultural DNA that patriarchy has passed down to us, that we need some type of savior, that we are born faulty, we're born sinners, we're born with a disease of the psyche or the soul, and that we need help, that we need to be justified, we need to be forgiven, we need to be made pure and clean and right, and that we need a savior. That is actually not a disease of Christianity, but a disease that has hidden within Christianity because of patriarchy. That idea that something is not right within us, even from the moment that we are conceived. At this point, the original sin is conception, the act of a man and a woman conceiving, makes us the perpetrators or the owners of that original sin, and therefore we come into this world needing to be saved from ourselves, from that original sin. To me, that is the ultimate disease that patriarchy has bestowed upon all of us, and it trickles into all of our different spiritual, religious, socio-political systems, and why it's so hard to get out of patriarchy completely. We just think that if we can escape the chaos of life, whether it be the right mantra, the right prayer, the right religion, the right denomination within that religion, if I have the right amount of money, if I have the right job, the right spouse, the right this, the right that, that's gonna save us from the chaos. There's some way to mandate that the chaos bows to us, that the chaos would bow to our God or to our mantra or to the work we've done on our psyche to become this beautiful law of attraction, manifesting whatever it is we want to manifest within our lives. But that's all part of that disease of patriarchy. It's at the root of all of that is saying we're not meant to be chaos beings living in a chaos world. We're meant to be divine beings living within a divine world. You see the difference? You have one where chaos rules, one where divinity rules and order rules and logos rules, mythos, logos, hint, hint. And if we just get our shit together, if we just get this right over here, we can make that leap to over here, and then we're never gonna suffer again. We're never gonna have pain. We're never gonna have grief. We're never gonna have all the stuff that chaos is, because we're promised that we can be over here. That is the disease of patriarchy that allows people to grow these huge groups of fundamentalists and to promise them that they know how to help you make that leap. Saying it another way is people feel so powerless. They don't feel like they have control over their lives. They're just allowing life to happen to them instead of making life happen for them. There's some truth to that. Like, you can make life happen for you, but chaos is always going to be on this planet, in this body, in this experience. We're never going to get rid of chaos. That is just what it is. And maybe that's the biggest spiritual lesson. Not that I'm trying to get spiritual on you, but maybe that's the biggest spiritual lesson, is just accepting that we live in a world of chaos. Our bodies are a world of chaos. It's part and partial to this experience. It's a product of the chaos of this world. And it's a beautiful part of the chaos of this world. If you think about it, if we can just learn to to accept that instead of fighting against it and trying to change it? I don't know, maybe we can just stop the episode right here. What do you think? Now, let's keep going. Said one other way, in this ironic power play, it gives people power in their lives to feel like they're not the eternal victims if they actually make themselves the eternal victims of the chaos. Think about that for a moment, right? So it's the whole law of attraction idea where you manifest something 50% of the time. It's about as effective as prayer. It is as effective as prayer. The other 50% of the time, you're beating yourself up because what did you do wrong? What formula did you not follow? What hidden magnetism in your aura did you not get rid of? Did you not purify? What unconscious patterns do you need to bring to the surface to make sure that you get it right this next time? It's this constant battle of fighting yourself to feel like you can control the chaos in the world. And it does give you a sense of power, but the sense of power is actually victim blaming yourself over and over and over again, which gets the self-help world to get you to spend a lot of money in it. The religious world, it gets you to pledge your allegiance to it and to vote for it. But today, we really want to look though at how do myths create fundamentalism and how do fundamentalists become fundamentalist. In order to do this, before we dive into the other sections of today's video, let's look at the Gospel of Mark, the gospel that most theologians say is actual history, factual history, not just biblical theology. In reality, though, historian Bart Ehrman and theologian William Redd have pointed out that Mark's gospel is not biblical history, that it cannot be taken as facts. It is a theological history that points to a theological truth they want to make. So let's look at this a little bit deeper. Take the story of the Transfiguration in Mark 9. Jesus brings 3 disciples up to the mountain, transforms into radiant light, and speaks with Moses and Elijah. Then a divine voice declares, "This is my beloved son. Listen to him." But Jesus immediately tells them not to share what they saw until his resurrection. This secrecy, known as the Messianic secret, is unique to Mark. It suggests that Jesus' divine identity wasn't widely known during his lifetime, but only interpreted that way after his death. You could say Jesus didn't even really know in Mark about his divinity. It's people looking back on history and reinterpreting it to make sense to their present day. Does that sound like anything we've reviewed in our understanding of how history is made? Perhaps. That's how we're not supposed to make history, right? Anywho, it was never meant to be taken as a literal historical event. It was mythos conveying a spiritual truth. It was mythos conveying a theological insight. But fundamentalism flattens that mythos into logos, demanding that it be read as absolute historical fact. When myths are mistaken as history, it flattens what that myth was trying to do. It rips out the power to change and transform the psyche and to help it understand the chaos of this world and living in that chaos. And it makes it super one-dimensional, flat. It doesn't have any depth. It just becomes rigid ideology and rigid theology. We then build rigid ideologies, moral systems, and political movements, not on the deep truth the myth was meant to reveal, but on a literal reading that silences the nuance, mystery, and evolution. This is how fundamentalism takes root, by turning metaphor into mandate, by confusing meaning with certainty, by trying to pin down the divine instead of dancing with it. So when we turn rich, mysterious stories like the Gospel of Mark into dogma, we don't just lose meaning, we lose awe. And this is where I actually had an aha moment. When I was putting all of this together, I realized that when we take mythos out of that mysterious, magical, it's very liminal space, we make it into these bricks that we then stack on top of each other that have no ability to evolve with us. They have no ability to help the soul make its place and make its peace within our bodies. And we have no ability to imagine a different world than what we're living. We have no ability to stir and dance with the imagination or to speak in metaphors of what is beyond our understanding via via words and logos. It forces us into a factual blueprint of this world that we were never meant to buy into. And it becomes a static brick of ideology. Something that once had power to liberate the soul now gets weaponized to trap it. That right there is one of the core issues with fundamentalism, and we're going to explore how we got there in this next segment. Key point number 2 for today: how did we get from mythos to logos? And of course, we're going to start with a definition of what logos and mythos are before we dive into understanding how we got into the situation that is allowing fundamentalism to flourish at the moment. What is logos? Logos is a Greek word used by Aristotle as one of the 3 core rhetorical tools alongside ethos, which is credibility, and pathos, which is emotion. Logos is the rational, factual, and objective part of thought. It's the language of science, logic, deduction, reason, and empirical truth. It relies on reality of the senses, conscious awareness, and realism. Today, masculinity is often associated with logos. It's calm, collected, the leader, rational thought. It doesn't show emotion. Emotions are bad because it doesn't fit into the logos box, and therefore it is prized in our patriarchal society. On the other hand, what is mythos? Mythos lives in the realm of the soul. It's the liminal. It's not tangible. It's symbolic, narrative truth that helps us make sense of an experience. Mythos is not interested in proof. It is interested in meaning. It lives in the unconscious, the mystical, the magical, the sacred unknown. Mythos knows chaos as part of life and teaches us how to dance with it, not erase it. Before the rise of science and formal philosophy, our ancestors leaned heavily on mythos to shape their worldview. They didn't need to fact check a myth. They felt its truth. And remember back to when I was talking about Clarissa Pinkola Estes and her definition of what a cantadora storyteller was in her culture. It was a choose your own adventure type of thing, because she would be so in the moment. She would transcend herself in order to be able to share the right ending of that story for whoever was listening to it. It's not just one concrete thing. It's always evolving. Yes, they didn't need to fact check a myth. They felt its truth. And as a result, they lived in a state of awe, which we now know is actually good for the human psyche. According to Psychology Today and the National Library of Medicine, awe reduces stress, quiets the inner critic, and increases feelings of connection and well-being. Dr. Chris Mozinek says awe expands our perspective, inspires generosity and compassion, and improves overall mental health. In short, we need awe. But then science arrived, not gently, but forcefully. Not as a partner to mythos, but as a replacement. And here's something crucial. This wasn't just about knowledge, it was also a backlash to the previous thousands of years almost of the Roman Catholic Church. For centuries, the Roman Catholic Church had weaponized mythos. They took stories meant to guide the soul and turned them into tools of dogma, fear, and authoritarian control. They drained awe of its mystery and replaced it with hierarchy. So it makes perfect sense that Copernicus, Bacon, and Newton, sorry if I butchered one of those names, geniuses raised in this world rebelled toward logos. But instead of leading us back to a healthy balance, their rebellion led us into a whole new kind of imbalance, a world ruled by facts, formulas, and objectivity, where awe was no longer sacred, it was suspect. Little caveat again, keep in mind that because history as we know it is only told by those that won, that were victorious, and usually those were the white elite men or the elite men, because it wasn't always white, we don't really know what else was happening in history at this point in time and how many people were trying to fight back at this. That really doesn't start happening until this modern age where we have more history being captured by things like what I'm doing now. So you have to keep that in mind, that this is a very narrow lens of history, and we're actually going to talk about that in next week's episode. So stay tuned for that. So let's look at Nicholas Copernicus. He lived from 1473 to 1543, He was a Renaissance polymath, active as a mathematician, astronomer, and Catholic canon, who formulated a model for the universe that placed the sun, rather the earth, at its center. He saw his scientific discoveries as religious activity that filled him with awe, but found his findings disturbing. Why? Because he found that we only held a peripheral place within the universe, not the primary place within the universe. Further than that, we lived on an unremarkable planet in his eyes, circling a minor star in the universe. He could no longer trust his own perceptions because the earth that seemed static was actually in rapid motion. Thus, he experienced existential angst. Let's move on to Francis Bacon. He lived from 1561 to 1626. He was an English philosopher and statesman who served as Attorney General and Lord Chancellor of England under King James I. Bacon argued the importance of natural philosophy guided by scientific method, and his works remained influential throughout the scientific revolution. Bacon has been called the father of empiricism, holds that true knowledge or justification comes only or primarily from sensory experience and empirical evidence. So you've got to be able to back up that sensory experience. He declared that science must be free from the shackles of mythology, believing that reason alone could save humanity. And then we usher in Isaac Newton. Most of us know that name. Isaac Newton was from 1642 to 1726 or 27, we're not sure. He was an English polymath, active as a mathematician, physicist, astronomer, alchemist, theologian, and author. Newton was a key figure in the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment that followed. He sought to purge Christianity of mystical elements, seeing myths as primitive modes of thought. These men didn't hate awe. They just didn't trust anything that couldn't be measured, proven, or controlled. And their influence set the stage for an entire age, the Enlightenment, that would worship logos at the expense of everything else. The consequences of this scientific revolution and the Enlightenment age, Karen Armstrong puts it this way: diluted logos cannot deal with deep-rooted fears, desires, and neuroses. You can't logic your way out of grief. You can't measure the soul's longing for meaning, and you definitely cannot rationalize your way through existential dread. But not everyone in that age of reason celebrated this total shift. Let's look at Blaise Pascal. He was a brilliant mathematician and philosopher, and he was horrified by what this new hyper-rational worldview was doing to the human soul. He looked into the vastness of the universe and saw only silence. The eternal silence of these infinite spaces terrifies me, he wrote. Pascal knew that without stories, without meaning, science alone left us spiritually unmoored. He opposed the rising dominance of rationalism and empiricism, recognizing that something vital was being lost, something myths once held for us. And here's the thing, Pascal was not wrong. What he feared back then, we're living now. The loneliness, the nihilism, the anxiety and existential dread, the ever-growing disconnect from our inner and outer world and from each other and from the earth herself, that's what happens when mythos is dominated by logos. That's what happens when we try to replace mystery with certainty. And this right here is the soil where fundamentalism grows, because patriarchy loves a system it can control. And logos, untempered by mythos, it is perfect for that. This brings us back full circle into how patriarchy and fundamentalism coexist. Just as those men were fighting their way and rebelling against the logo-sized mythos within the Catholic Church, the logo-sized world that they developed actually found its way back into religion, as we're seeing in this present day and age. It shaped culture, it shapes us. And patriarchy, as I just said, loves logos. Big heart. Because logos can be quantified, standardized, and used to control. It favors logic over emotion, structure over mystery, authority over intuition. When stories stop evolving, when myths become frozen in time, misread as literal history, that's when they become bricks. Heavy, rigid, dangerous when thrown. That's how myths become dogma. That's how when stories that are meant to awaken the soul end up building the walls of patriarchy. Here's the thing. Patriarchy doesn't just distort our stories. It's incredibly skilled at manufacturing collective amnesia, especially around the myths, memories, and wisdom that could have liberated us long ago. And what you're seeing here, this severing of mythos from daily life, the spiritual soul silencing, that's not a coincidence, y'all. It's the same erasure that happened with the feminine consciousness of the world, the sacred feminine. The embodied spiritual wisdom passed down through story, ritual, symbol, and mystery was systematically overwritten, not just by logos, not just by men, not by women who learned to gatekeep other women, but by an entire system built on forgetting. Now let's revisit a couple quotes from our last video, but with new eyes. The first by Maurice Halbachs. Collective memory is essentially a reconstruction of the past that adapts the image of historical facts to the beliefs and spiritual need of the present, Mythos. And by Bart Ehrman, one of my favorites, this is taken from his book, Jesus Before the Gospels. Individual and collective memory are not flawless records of the past. They're reconstructions of memory shaped by emotion, bias, and cultural context. The past is not a fixed entity back there in time. It is always being transformed in our minds, depending on what our minds are occupied with in the here and now. So if our minds and our cultural memory right now are occupied by patriarchy, that's the story we keep telling ourselves and each other. And that's the God we keep worshiping. I'm not talking about the God of Christianity. I'm talking about patriarchy as the God. This is why this matters so much. We're not just talking about myths or logos or old dusty books. We're talking about the lens through which we teach our children, structure our institutions, choose our leaders, and form our spiritual paths. That is why the next part is everything. Are you ready for some hope? Are you ready for the antidote to fundamentalism? Well, sit back, because here it is. We don't need to get rid of our myths. We don't need to throw the myths out with the bathwater. We just need to revive them. We need to look back at history from the wide-angle lens that I keep talking about, incorporating more than just the elite winners into our stories. Rewrite it. Rewrite the myths that go along with it, as I'm doing in the Sacred Tryst, and then it will help us see the present in a new way and construct a future in a new way. As Karen Armstrong reminds us, a myth is something that in some sense happened once, but which also happens all the time. An occurrence needs to be liberated from the confines of a specific period and brought into the lives of contemporary worshipers, or it will remain a unique, unrepeatable incident or even a historical freak event that cannot really touch the lives of others. So take, for example, the death and resurrection of Jesus, which actually comes from more ancient stories that people actually enacted so they could embody it with ritual. Remember we talked about that last week? That myths and ritual go hand in hand, and without ritualizing myths, the myths aren't as powerful in our psyche. When you think about it, we're all dying all the time. I mean, women, we die every 24 to 32 days on our cycle. We die when we go through perimenopause. We die as young maidens when we have our first kid, or when we decide we're not going to have kids. Those are all deaths. And we resurrect ourselves into a new body each and every time. How much more powerful is that story now when you take it out of the literal and put it back in mythos where it belongs? That was one of my first key takeaways when I stopped looking at these fundamentalist beliefs from Christianity and put the power back in them when I learned that they were mythos. Wow, so vital. They touch us in so much of a deeper way. And yeah, the sermons try to get there, but they don't do a good enough job because they start with it being a literal event. That's the real medicine. We don't need fixed literal myths. We need living myths, myths that evolve as we evolve. We need stories that help us hold paradox, stories that guide, not govern, stories that breathe, not cage, stories that bring back the mystical, the metaphorical, the soul medicine that logos could never offer us. That's exactly what I'm doing with my historical fiction novel, The Sacred Tryst. I'm rewriting the myth of Mary Magdalene. I'm reclaiming the sacred feminine. I'm portraying Christ not as a savior from chaos, but a student of it, a student of her, of the divine feminine, of embodied love. Because chaos is not the enemy, control is. So the question is no longer, how do we save ourselves? It's this: what stories are we brave enough to live now as if they were true? Can we live them? Can we embody them? Can we tell them to the next generation and start to change this pattern of patriarchy? In recap, we went deep again today. We looked at how to define fundamentalism, what disease patriarchy perpetuates on all of us that allows fundamentalism to survive and thrive in this day and age. We then looked at what logos and mythos are and how we moved from mythos to logos via the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment age. And lastly, we learned what the fundamentalism antidote is. Re-looking at history from that wide-angle lens, you can say it with me now, being able to rewrite those histories and the mythologies so it rewrites our present and gives us a better future to hope for. And these stories will be able to evolve with us again instead of being cemented bricks that build the fundamentalism and patriarchy. So now we know the danger of when we confuse mythos for logos. We don't just lose the magic, we risk building entire institutions on concrete ideas that were never meant to be fixed in time. We lose the dance with mystery. We forget how to live in awe. But here's what we haven't fully explored yet. What happens when those myths, old and new, are still quietly shaping our world? How do myths show up today in the way we talk about success, identity, God, gender, country, even health? And most importantly, who benefits when we believe in those myths as facts, as logos, and let it become fundamentalism in our own lives? In the next episode, we're breaking down how modern myths, short little phrases like hard work leads to success and God is good all of the time, have become new forms of logos, and how these stories, just like the ancient ones, shape our behaviors, beliefs, and a sense of self. We'll explore how to recognize these cultural myths for what they are, reclaim the ones that nourish us, and rewrite the ones that don't. Because you deserve a mythology that evolves with you instead of cages you in. So come ready. We're going to look at the world you live in right now through the mythos lens you've been reclaiming. If you made it this far, thank you so very much. I really appreciate your watching this and really embodying and embedding these ideas into your own psyche. If you know anybody that might benefit from this series, please send them the entire playlist. I'll have the link below, and then point out the ones that you have found especially helpful for yourself. Again, these build on top of each other, so it will help you and help your friends to watch them in order. And then you'll all have a language to talk together in order to help you deconstruct patriarchy and all of its ideology from your lives. Last little section here. I want to give you something to really embody this truth with. This one is called the Logos Trap. So excited about this one. We are going to actually put on our mindful caps to look for mythos out in our world. Every time you catch yourself saying something like, that's just the way it is, if I do this perfectly, I'll be safe, that's not rational, pause. Ask yourself, is that actual truth? Or is that a cultural story, a myth, pretending to be logos? A fundamentalism. Keep a running list in your notes app or journal titled Things I Thought Were Facts But Might Just Be Stories. I bet you'll be amazed at how quickly your list grows. If you're feeling brave, drop a couple of them in the comment section throughout the week. Take the story of the Transfiguration. Show that. Oh, that's good.